Hello and welcome. Before I introduce this week's guest, a little recommendation for you. If you're struggling with making important decisions, check out a book called The Necktie and the Jaguar by retired clinical psychologist, Jungian analyst, and shamanic practitioner Carl Greer. In this book, he reveals how he tapped into the wisdom and power of unseen worlds for guidance and inspiration. It's a fascinating memoir which offers some valuable keys and questions that inspire the kind of thinking that guides you effortlessly on your own path to transformation. So I highly recommend it. You can check it out at carlgreer.com. And now, joining us today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced her the most on her extraordinarily adventurous life journey is singing philosopher, voice pioneer, sound visionary, educator, and international singer-performer and recording artist Chloe Goodchild. And Chloe has sung for the Dalai Lama and for world leaders. And at the Dalai Lama's, I think it was an ordination in Belfast, she was also music director, composer, and a performer at the Vagina Monologues with Eve Ensler in Madison Square Gardens, where she also conducted her Vulva Choir, which comprised 75 of the top actresses of the world, including Queen Latifah, Jane Fonda, Brooke Shields, and Glenn Close. And Zoe has recorded with Rumi poet Coleman Barks, film director Jane Campion, the Discovery Channel, the BBC, and with leading world jazz and pop musicians. And she's the author of the book, The Naked Voice, Transform Your Life Through the Power of Sound. And she presents and is an author for Sounds True audiobooks and the Shift Network. And all of that, and much more, was catalyzed by a period of deafness when Zoe was just 4 years old and fell in love with sound and with silence. And we'll hear more about that later in the show. For now, let's meet Chloe. Chloe, it's really good to have you. You should have been here a few months ago, but I'm so glad that you're here tonight.
I'm so happy to meet you again, Sandie. It's just great to be here. Great honor. Lovely.
Well, we're privileged to have you. So thank you. Books. What was it like for you having to pick just 10?
Impossible. I mean, it's a very, very interesting practice. But it's so interesting having had a few months to just reflect on it, that I'm really, really glad that I chose the ones I chose. If we were to do it again, obviously, there'd be another 10. My library is insane, and I guess, I just love books. I love the energy of books, even, how you can sometimes order books that you actually don't even read till maybe a few weeks later. They carry an energy, and I think particularly in this time, where we're so sort of having to spend so much time in front of computers, it's such a relief to hold a real book, right?
Yeah. It certainly is. If I want to do any serious reading, I take myself to a different part of the house and sit down on a chair with a book in front of me, and it just has a whole other feeling about it.
Lovely.
And it's interesting what you say about books, because, I've heard some people talk about words as being alive, and having their own angels or their own devas. And, you're absolutely right. You could pick up a book and sometimes not even read it for decades. But when you do, it's always the right moment.
Absolutely. And there are so many different kinds. There are kinds that have many, many, many words, and then others that, they may sort of interface like poetry with images, and then that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Because you're holding energy, you're holding the energy of the visual word as well as the audible or the readable word.
I was reading a book last night of somebody that I'd just been introduced to, and I was absolutely delighted as I was reading the first pages, because it was such a different experience than normal. I mean, the person's way of thinking and the way he used words to convey something, and it was so beautifully and expertly done. You know, and I read dozens of books, so I don't often think about the words too much. You know, they're either good or they're not. But this one, there was something in, I think, in the personality and the thought processes of the author that really brought this book alive. And I was just, you know, in love with books all over again.
Well, it's really interesting when you take people like John O'Donoghue or, you know, Spanish people that have Latin American voice, and you can hear how that finds its way into, you know, the written word as well. You know, that is so interesting to me. So when you hear John O'Donoghue, for example, reciting his poetry, it's he's achieved his mission, I think. His voice is like music, and the music is also on the page. And that was always my intention with writing, is to see if it's possible to write so that the reader can receive words that give them, that have a vibration.
Yes, the frequency, yeah.
And a frequency. Really.
Yeah, now that's quite an art to be able, because some people will, you know, you listen to them read a passage and you're in love with it. If you read the passage without their voice, you don't like it so much. So it's interesting when someone's got that frequency.
So interesting. So interesting.
So your books, your 10, we don't always put them on the page, on the website, in the order that you write them. I do need to ask if the original order was chronological, or, you know, my favorite from 1 to 10, or just 10 books.
Well, they're all so different that I would say they are 10 diverse books. Yeah.
Okay.
A diversity of 10 books.
Okay, so let's talk about the very first one, which is a magical adventure by one of Germany's most popular and famous authors, who also wrote the beloved Never Ending Story. And the book is Momo by Michael Ende. So tell us about this book. What was happening in your life when you read it, and why it had such an impact?
Well, this is the book. I wonder if I can just show that, because it's just so magical, this particular version of it. And as you can see there, Momo is the heroine of this story, and she is a little girl that I really identified with. As soon as I was reading this book, I could not put it down. So it's an adult fairy tale, which is always compelling for me. I find it very easy, and it really holds my attention. And I think it's because this archetype of this little girl, who could be representing so many little girls and boys right now, was someone who came into this life with immense wisdom. You know, I'm just aware increasingly of the number of young people I'm meeting at the moment who just seem to be incredibly old souls, you know, and you sort of think, goodness, they so need to be coming in at this time. So Momo came from the land of amphitheaters. So again, you know, immediately I was caught by that image, because I'm a great lover of the resonance that you will find in an amphitheater. And so that immediately triggered my love of sound, and Greece and Crete, particularly. And she is really this astonishing character who, you know, if you saw her in the street, as you will have just seen in that image, she's got quite a kind of ragamuffin sort of look and feel, but she had this capacity to listen. And Michael Ende describes this quality of listening. When she listened, it was as if you were sitting inside the giant ear of the universe. And that always just really struck me. I thought, wow, you know, more of that, please, you know. And then to read a whole story that is about someone for whom listening was really saved the world. She was someone who she had this extraordinary capacity, and therefore she was attracting a lot of just the regular men and women living in the community. There was a sweeper and, somebody working in a shop. And so it was at that level, it was just, again, I really liked the fact that it was really all about ordinary people having transformative moments with Momo, in a very everyday context, apparently, until suddenly you realize there's this presence of another kind. And these presences are what are called the grey men that wear these suits and they smoke cigars. And and they've got these kind of grey hats on, they all look exactly the same. And they start infiltrating the community. And these beings are, their intention is to really persuade, to see if they can manipulate as many people as possible to to have a whole new take on their jobs, on their lives, and to start getting more engaged with the financial aspect of the work they're doing. And of course, all these ordinary people are just like having a really cool time with their hairdressers or sweepers or shopkeepers. There's a real sense of community, and they all meet at this amphitheater with Momo. So you're already in this kind of childlike, wondrous experience, and a sense of a kind of ideal community that we probably all just treasure if we've had the privilege of that kind of life where village life was happening, and there were people whose doors you could knock on, and they would open their doors and everybody would know everybody. So what happens is, so the presence, this kind of really strange, foreign presence, it feels like unfamiliar, starts kind of pervading the atmosphere. And Momo is sublimely unaware of this because she lives in this timeless world. She's not governed by duality, it would seem. She's not governed by kind of us and them, right and wrong, better, worse, good, bad, higher, lower. She's in more of a quantum universe, you could say now, And so thank God. And she has this magic creature that shows up in her life just at this moment when the grey men start pervading the community. And this creature is called Cornelia, and Cornelia is a tortoise. So, whereas in a kind of whodunit kind of, Star Trek style, movie that just starts intensifying, with more of a kind of warlike, conflict is coming in here. We're going to face something here that we're going to have to deal with. Cornelia just represents complete timelessness. Cornelia is even deeper than that. She seems to be able to walk anywhere and nothing touches her. She knows exactly where, rather like a sort of dancing wooly or a Tai Chi master, And so when the absolute crisis, there's then a kind of build-up of tension in the town, because the other beings are not so familiar with how to engage with these guys, and they are quite fascinated by them. And the idea of having a bit more money would be really nice, and all of that. So, they're kind of all a little bit seduced. And so what follows is this kind of, it's like the drama of, duality meets, the illusion of superficial desire and success and all of that, meets the farther beyond time. And so this is really interesting. So there's this beneficent, it's like the presence of Father Time himself, who shows up at a very key moment in the story, and the relationship that Momo has out of time with this incredible, he's like a sort of magician archetype, And Cornelia leads her to this extraordinary being, this magician character who lives beyond time. And so you have this moment where you sort of think, oh my God, there's so much suspense because they're so close to being endlessly assailed by the grey men. But Cornelia graciously takes another street, or, and they're just down the end and they might be coming, but no, somehow they graciously, gracefully, timelessly manage to get to this. It's like a luminous door. And they go through this door just within split seconds of the grey men, and who cannot, they have no power to withstand the light that's coming through this door. So when I first read this book, it was really quite a few moons ago. Let me see, when did I first read it? That was your question. It wasn't that long ago, actually. I mean, it was probably when, you see, I'm now in my mid-60s, right? So that it was probably around about 30s, 40s. So I say it was not that long ago, of course, just a few years ago. But I didn't read it as a child, is what I mean.
Yeah.
But it touched the child in me, that was always like that, if you like, that was always kind of slightly out of time, always in wonder, always just like fascinated to know, if trees could speak, what would they say, stuff like that. And much more at home with the elements and, in the etheric realms. And so this really appealed to me on that account. But also, what, of course, maybe I shouldn't say what the punchline is, but it's a very transformative outcome that you wouldn't imagine being possible, I would say. And that happens through Momo's insight. She has this intuition that knows exactly what to do, and she will confront, illusion if required, because she knows it's illusion.
Yeah. When I was looking the book up, the author was known as a proponent of economic reform and claimed to have had the concept of aging money in mind when writing Momo.
Wow.
I don't know what aging money means as a phrase.
Interesting, isn't it? Because that's really coming up at the moment with the whole economic crisis.
Yeah.
I think he was quite prophetic, probably.
73, he wrote that book, 1973. Yeah.
It's amazing.
50 odd years ago, yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. Because it really is a book for our time,
Yes.
It really speaks to our time. So I can't encourage people to read it enough.
Good. Well, the second book on your list is one that you say has been like a second Bible for you since you returned from India in 1990, following a no-mind experience, which of course we want to know all about. The book is the Upanishads.
The Upanishads. Well, these are like 4,000-year-old Vedic texts. And this particular book was, so these Upanishads would have been originally written in Sanskritic language or ancient Buddhistic language. They were really the source of really calling the individual to an understanding of oneness, really what that is and what that means. And so when I came back from India, the experience that called me out there was an intensification of inquiry around who am I and what am I doing here? And I'd realized that even though I'd had this whole music education and so on, which was amazing. I mean, I learned so much about music through the lens of Western classical sacred music, for example. But even still, when I got to the end of studying in Cambridge, I could still feel there was something missing. So I went on this hunt, and you know, how is it that, you know, we are led on these journeys? You know, it's like, who makes that happen? Even that's like, well, I remember when I was 18 and I went roaring off to Africa for 7 months to do voluntary service out there, not knowing why, but just knowing I had to get out of England, you know, out of this kind of squeaky clean, overly religious, institutional religious environment that I'd been brought up in. And my parents just like going, "You're making a terrible mistake," you know, but they were just genuinely, you know, concerned, like, who is, you know, roaring off, you know, in the middle of January to East Africa, to 40 miles off the tarmac road. So, so that was the beginning, I would say, of grounding a new music inside me, a music that connected my experience of sound with music as a spiritual practice. And nothing in my English education had really prepared me for that or told me anything much about that. You know, obviously just sing in choirs, you know. But there was no real kind of authentic, focused, embodying practice for that I could find at that time. So when I went to India, to cut a very long story short, I'd been dreaming of India, if you like, prior to that time, because I just started absorbing Indian music and what that actually means, you know, the whole music philosophy of India, and the voice is absolutely central to the Indian music spiritual philosophy. So it was the first time that I really encountered an ancient tradition, you know, that had really brought together this experience of oneness with sound being the way to it. And so the Mandukiya Upanishad, which I found in the Upanishads book, was the first experience that I found that helped me to navigate this no mind experience that I had when I was in India. And in India, I'd been meeting these non-dual teachers who were really teaching this self-inquiry process, which involved a lot of meditation, silence, and just really asking this essential question, who are you? So I then transferred that back when I came back to England to who is singing, you know, so it was like how to find out, I suppose if I'd been a gardener, it would have been who's gardening, you know, or, you know, the question was, who am I? And how is that going to express itself? So this book, the Upanishads, really helped me to make sense of this incredibly blissful experience that I had accessed through with this transmission master, someone with whom you sit and you're literally in the presence of someone who, by their sheer presence, they are so embodied, they are so integrated between heaven and earth, they are so free of suffering, they are, their experience of spirituality, you can just feel it, just lives in every cell of the body. Now, these are really unusual people, and of course we can find them everywhere, but it just so happened in my story that this particular teacher showed up there. And he was called Harilal Punjaji at that time, a very unusual master of silence. And he really demonstrated to me how silence itself is a way to disappearing the egoic mind. And so that's a longer story. And I don't know whether you want me to, we can perhaps come back to that later on if you wish.
Yeah. Why don't we come back to that if we've got time?
Exactly. But the point is, if anybody is listening to this and would like to have access to this being, what happened was I met him before he was known in the world. And shortly after that time, obviously, I was telling everyone, as were other people, the Theravadan Buddhist monks that were with me at that time, a wonderful being called Elijah, whose wife became Gangaji. So the many wonderful things came out of that particular gathering. And Punjaji ended up being called Papaji. Again, another experience of, the masculine in its most positive form, in its most radiant, if you like. And again, such a relief, when we're living in such a negative experience of patriarchy, and all of that. So when I had this experience, very, very blissful experience, and I remember thinking to myself, goodness, that someone in here was saying, Chloe has now died, right?
This is what you were hearing.
That's what I was hearing. So there was a consciousness present. And obviously my human voice was coming out of that. My interior voice was coming out of it and going, Chloe has now died as the personality, the one that was once identified with being Chloe. So how are you going to live the rest of your life? I was only 36, right? So it's like a little bit of a interesting, but of course, when you're in that experience, you're not concerned about that. We're back with Momo again, if you like. But nevertheless, I was not grounded in the experience. And so it was really sound and these incredible Upanishads, of which the Mandukiya Upanishad revealed itself to me in this book. And it's a beautiful book because it's just a selection.
Yes.
And this particular Upanishad basically explains the meaning of the universal sound Om. So it's, it was like, and that was really the only sound that made any sense to me for a very long time, like for easily 6 or 7 months. All I could think to do was sound Om and just Om. And then, so what it does is the Upanishad, it's like spiritual science of love, it breaks down the sound into 3 sounds as 3 levels of consciousness. And then the fourth, so ah, oo, and and the fourth being the revelatory sound called Turiya, which is the absolute transcendent, the transformation of those 3 sounds. So it's simply saying if you sound those 3 sounds for long enough, there's a chance grace of Turiya may visit you. In other words, what will happen is your attachment to, your self-identity, your attachment to, the duality game will be lifted, will be released. And therefore the attachment to fear will be released. So that became absolutely central to my life's work.
Something else that is very relevant to today, and people need to release fear.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I cannot encourage people enough to do this, and just because what's so beautiful about it is that just like humming, it is completely accessible, to everyone. We all know that, even if we have a beautiful moment with somebody, there's a tendency to go, oh, it's just a natural sound. And then if you bring the lips together, you basically seal it into the body, and that sound just starts to it starts to instill every single vibrating cell in the body, and it's the most glorious thing, it's the most simple thing.
And that sound, isn't that the one where we fall into deliciousness or absolute pleasure or satisfaction?
Absolutely, on every level, love making, eating beautiful food, deep soul friendship. It's most, it just is natural. It is. In fact, the lovely Jonathan Goleman has written a whole book called The Humming Effect.
Yeah. Jonathan's talked about that quite a bit, and it is amazing that we have all of this ability here.
Yes,
here.
It's all here, isn't it? It's we just have to open that door and we're in it. And it's a receiving. It's not like, oh, right, now I'm singing, now I'm doing some kind of personality voice thing. It's deeper than that. It's an interior sounding, that you can even then hear as an interior experience that doesn't require any outer sound. And then you're moving deeper into the primordial sound of consciousness.
Yeah. And the particular book that we're talking about, the version, there have been so many translations, is a selection by Eknath Easwaran.
Iswaran.
Easwaran.
He's an extraordinary being who I believe spends a lot of time in Scotland. I think he might be Persian. And he's just he's beautiful. Again, probably if you Google him, you'll find his live voice, and that's really worth it too. Beautiful sound.
So book number 3 is Illuminations, a novel of Hildegard Bingen by Margaret Surratt. I think this was published around 2013, and you said you just could not put it down.
No, come on. This is just, whoa. Somebody that has the capacity to produce something so compelling, as to be able to write a novel about one of the greatest sacred feminists of the medieval era. She was one of the first, if you like, of it within the European field. And oh my God, what a story again, and again, it's all about the transformation of, the wounded healer. She's at that time is the poor little girl, who gets the deal to be sent as an anchorite, locked up at the age of 8, inside a Christian monastic tower, with a rather terrifying mentor who is her Christian mentor. And she literally spends, I think it's at least 4 decades in there. And imagine that, like, so you've experienced of everyday life, ordinary everyday life, is 8 years as a child. So she would have gone right through to her kind of the beginning of the formation of her mental faculties and so on. And not a problem. And so what happens is Margaret Surratt takes you through the angst of this child, for God's sake, who's having to find her way, trying to navigate this really confining situation. And it's all about how she navigates that, how she befriends this incredible monk who starts teaching her Latin and the names of herbs, as he's sending her food through a little hatch in a hole in the wall. She has these all the way through her childhood. She's having these, what they describe as seizures, like epileptic seizures, or they try to medicalize it. But what's happening is she's having these visions of the angels of Saint Cecilia, who comes to her being the great patron saint of music, and Mary, and so she's an ecstatic, she is born a mystical child, as many children are. And there's something about the nature of the oppressive, what would be for many of us a very oppressive context, that actually creates the grist and the gradual revelation that enables her to flower and to flourish and to become this master of herbalism and botany, of nature, of and sound and song. And so she starts hearing the monks in the monastery just singing these incredible antiphons and anthems. And of course, she's wanting to absorb that. And then this fabulous monk who befriends her, because he gets that she's a really inquiring child and she really must understand this. So he teaches her Latin and she starts to become educated, which at that time would not be on the cards for so many women. You would just be being prepared for, marriage, and hopefully, a very good marriage. Oh my God, what happens is, and just, it's like, what happens eventually is she is able to persuade, to inspire, to manifest. You can feel her spirit and her connection with the heavenly realm, combined with this extraordinary kind of process of having to navigate the confines and the constriction. And also her mentor becomes increasingly jealous and envious of her. You can feel that she's not having the same direct experience of God, that Hildegard is naturally having. But she basically eventually manages to burst out of this old patriarchal paradigm and establishes her own following. And that involves becoming the abbess of this convent. And she's really far out because she comes from a theatrical background. And so she had enough time to see, the dramatics of life and so on. And she has all her nuns dressing up as brides of God, and she has them. So they know how to drink beer. They make beer because she wants them all to have really rosy cheeks and to be really alive and embodied. So again, that's really kind of questionable.
Very progressive.
Very progressive, but her visions and her insights and her teachings eventually get translated into these extraordinary illuminations and manuscripts, which, by the grace of God, were the Second World War, where at some point they were received into Germany somewhere. They were hidden. Fortunately, copies were made of them. And the wonderful Matthew Fox, this book another book of Hildegard's manuscripts you can find with Matthew Fox's. He's made a whole beautiful book on the illuminations. Same title.
Her story is like the quintessential fairy tale. The Hans Christian Andersen, this child that's, put away and left to, just do nothing for 40 years. And then suddenly this incredible, happy ending.
It is. It's incredible, but it's like there was the prince was the Prince of Peace, it's like the almighty presence of the One, because she was utterly clear. But not only that, of course, she restored and reunified nature with God. So that was one of her great, great, great gifts. So all her singing is just celebrations of particularly very, these beautiful depictions of Mary as the goddess of nature, of creation. Very sensuous, And so I listened to some of these. Again, how do these things happen? But a friend of mine who was an opera singer went off to India at some point, and she just said, I want you to keep this manuscript of Hildegard's music. She said, because I don't think I'm going to have use for it anymore. I couldn't believe it. So I was given this musical manuscript of her antiphons and so on. So I've made a couple of versions, and I definitely intend to do more. They're so profound. And she's obviously using what you hear. I've got a harmonium here. So you'll hear this just like unchanging sound, of the drone, right? And then la da 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 da, oh viridissima viraga. This one's called the greening of the Virgin, which basically means the self-contained feminine. Ave que inventoso. So again, like the Indian music, we have this unchanging, our Gregorian chant, that's where these worlds meet. And so that unchanging sound, that's what I love. So you've still got this presence of the one with these amazing musical modes pouring out of her. Incredible, So I made a couple of versions with a string quartet, and just brought the sound down a little bit, because my practice with them was to see if I could just really embody the sound within my own body more at that time. So this was like 2000 and something.
So it wasn't just a book you read, it became something that, expanded into other areas of your life, your music, the sound, the listening, the chanting, the singing. Very full experience for you.
Very full. Absolutely extraordinary. Amazing. And just that connection between novel and narrative, spiritual, just amazing. Margaret Sharat, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, book number 4, The Essential Rumi, Coleman Barks, and you have travelled with, sung with Coleman Barks, toured with.
A great, great blessing. A great, great blessing. I describe him as a kind of Dionysian monk, from Athens, Georgia. He's an extraordinary being. And my dear friend Roger Houston, we in a previous incarnation about 20 years ago, we started inviting people like Robert Bly, the great American poet, and various Ramdas and various people, and to our great delight, Coleman also came over. But I actually met him in the State of the World Forum. It was something that was happening in San Francisco when was it? 1997. And I just heard him singing and just reciting Rumi with Jayutal, this wonderful devotional chanting master, and this incredible whirling Mevlevi dervish dancer called Zuleika from Santa Fe, an amazing woman, and various and incredible David Darling, cellist, and these incredible Glenn Velez, amazing, these incredible master musicians. And so I was just enjoying listening to, and Coleman just had this wonderful Southern accent, and you'd hear this, you'd think, what's the likelihood that is going to be the voice of Rumi in our time? Because you sort of think, wow, what a really eccentric combination in a way, and it's brilliant. And so from that meeting onwards, we started working together. And this book that he created with John Moyne, my goodness, I think his translations, I think the reason why they have touched people so much is because they're just ordinary everyday. He manages to marry ordinary everyday speak, with this ecstatic love poetry, and he's completely uncompromised about it. There have been times, I think, when academic scholars of Rumi who are more familiar with the original Farsi, for example, would be questioning his versions. And he's quite clear that he basically, he felt his job was to release the Victorian interpretations from the original language, again, for a contemporary audience. But of course, he was doing it as a spiritual practice. So it wasn't like he knew that he was not doing it, but his programming was exactly, he had an incredible humor, incredible wildness. He loved wine. He was, and so a lot of the Rumi poets being about drunken mystics and all of that, and this sort of collision between drunkenness and ecstatic states. Beautiful, beautiful languaging. And so that's like a Bible for me, that book. Yeah.
Book number 5 is The Way of Inner Vigilance, Path to the Inner Light and the Realization of One's Divine Nature by Salim Michael.
Goodness me. I'm starting this is so interesting. I've never done this before. I'm sure other people say this. It's really interesting, not only doing what you've asked us to do, but now spelling it out. Because you start realizing, my God, I now understand why, maybe I'm just, this kind of intensity that has kind of pursued me through my life, that these books all carry this kind of intensity, of searching, of love, of presence, of trying to find, a language that really speaks to our time. So this book, The Way of Inner Vigilance, was written by this incredible guy who was a student of Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff brought these esoteric teachings from Eastern Europe, Anatolia. He brought them right from Georgia through and created his own utterly original, very fierce spiritual method teaching that was very much transmitted through movement, energy movement. And so Salim had actually then translated those teachings into his own version of those teachings. And Roger, again, my dear friend Roger, we went to visit him. It's thanks to Roger, actually, that we went to visit him in Paris, where he was. And he took us through these very rigorous practices, which involved, standing for a very extended period of time with your arms open out. And the only instruction is to abandon yourself. And it's like, what? Ordinary minds going, what? What do you mean abandon? Okay, just abandon yourself. And then he would just watch. There's no other instruction. And so, like a few minutes later, the art and so on. So there would be, basically, he would be sending allowing the body to demonstrate to you the craziness of the human mind. And the pain. Don't you realize what pain I'm going through? And all of that. So there were these incredible moments of breakthrough when the egoic mind just had to surrender. So this book that he wrote, which was really focusing and centered on the role of the witnessing consciousness. That was really the deepest teaching I received from it. And it's very profound. It really did bring another very powerful stream into my own teaching and work with the voice, was how we learn to observe, without judging, to observe ourselves or others without judging. And that there is this faculty of attention that we don't seem to be born with, but that we can learn. We can learn as human beings, which is to observe without judging. And so he would give us all these kind of crazy eccentric exercises, like at 11:10 tomorrow morning, bring total presence to your left elbow.
Yeah.
And notice everything red in the street at 4:30 this afternoon. It just...
and he would never explain any more than that.
No.
Just
and then
leave you to make of it whatever you're going to make of it.
Exactly. And of course, what's happening there is he's really requiring you to start to develop a very deep respect for time.
Yeah.
Time for presence, for intention, for motivation, and all these basic requirements for a deeper life experience. Yeah.
Mm. You know, you said something earlier about you're just beginning to realize as we're talking, you know, things that you hadn't realized even as you wrote your list. It's triggered for me an understanding of how the books and people's stories,
Right.
you know, they seem to reflect one another.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
your choice of books is you know, very exotic, very you know, I get the feeling they're also tactile and they're also physical
Oh, yeah.
and passionate and
Mm,
rich,
mm,
like the adventures that you've had, you know.
absolutely.
So it does make me wonder, you know, you said at the beginning, I mean, why do we get these nudges to do what we do or to read the books that we read when we read them? But it feels like there's this dance going on, you know. Are you picking up the books and are they informing you, or are you informing them? You
Mm,
know, it's
mm,
something that is much
mm.
deeper than I've ever thought about before.
Wow. Wow. Oh, well, that's amazing. That's lovely to hear that. Yeah. Because, yeah, that's such a great question, Sandie. You know, it's like which comes first? You know, you hear
Yeah.
about people talking about books falling off bookshelves. And let me see, for me, certainly the last two books, the Selim, the Inner Vigilance, this book, um, that came very much through the gift of my connection with Roger, my friendship with Roger. I wouldn't have perhaps known about that. So that was a gift from our relationship. Um, Let me see. Yeah. So they're like givens, I think, in my experience, very often, rather than falling off a bookshelf or something like that. They sort of just show up, though. They just, yeah, they do show up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, of course, other people, just like we're doing here, other people will say, have you read? You know, given what you're up to, have you read? You know, so it would come another
Mm,
given.
mm.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah, fascinating, really fascinating. And I'm also just beginning to realize how important it is to have contributors then talking about their books, not just compiling the list and publishing it, which
mm.
is what we did initially. And it
Right.
occurred to me a few months later, no, we need to have conversations about these. And I'm just beginning to understand why, because they come alive in a completely different way.
Totally. I love it. You know,
Mm,
as and when I have time, the Audible series, you know, where you can actually just listen to spoken versions of.
mm,
I'm I'm intending to do a spoken version of my books as well. I know various friends who've done this, and they loved it.
mm.
Really, it's really fun. And sometimes it's much easier for people to hear it when it's
Yeah.
spoken. But as you say, this kind
We
of
feel
engagement,
it then in a different way,
right?
you
Yeah,
know, and we remember it too.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
in a different way.
Yeah, I just met somebody today called, I think her name is, if I mean, it's like Manuela Altagracia, you know. And so if she'd written to me and said, my name is Manuela Altagracia, I wouldn't have heard how she said it, you know.
Yes,
This, it does make a big difference. Mm.
mm. It
And
does indeed.
also your presence and the way you're listening, you know, uh, it's usually the other way around. So it's really it's a real joy to to be in this way, you know. So it's a real pleasure, you know, to share what gives you most joy, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
And to be heard, isn't it? To be
Mm.
listened, be heard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a real, for me, it's a deep listening experience. You know, I
Yeah.
listen to people all the time when I interview them, but this
Mm,
series is different. It's got a different frequency to it, a different energy. And it's a very powerful, for me personally, experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, the guests, I've yet to have a guest say they didn't enjoy it. They've all got something very deep out of it, which is wonderful, because, you know, they have to have a reward for doing the task. And it's nice that they do get something out of it. But no, I think that there are some things that we do that,
Yes,
you know, we can't just dismiss as something we're doing. It has much more meaning than that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just to be aware, because there's the intimacy of our communication, and then there's the amazing generosity of all the listeners that are choosing to listen to, you know, from all parts of the planet, you know. So my gratitude for that too. I always remember Coleman Barks actually at the end of all our presentations or performances would say, "Thank you for the quality of your listening that enabled us to
Nice.
communicate like this." Yeah.
Yeah. So, book number 6, beautiful title, The Music of Life, Hazrat Inayat
You know.
Khan. Inayat, have I said that right?
Yes, perfect.
So, tell us about this book.
Well, you know, the whole lineage of Sufism and Hazrat Inayat Khan is really he was a musician, a phenomenal master musician of the veena, which is one of the oldest Indian instruments. And it's like the sitar and also the tambura, but it's massive. It has a very, very big gourd. It's really, really big. And he would play that and would sing, and literally, you know, you were transformed by the quality of the sound and so on. But this man was an absolute master of instrumental music, and he was also he communicated through, I have 11 volumes of his teachings on the relationship between you know, sound, consciousness, silence, the word, the spoken word, the sung word. It's just a musical experience, actually, listening and learning from his understanding, which is essentially, again, sourced from this ancient Indian ground of the great, you know, wisdom of the Vedas. And so he is another author, if you like, who when you're reading it, it is as if you're listening to music. His writings, very profound, very accessible, very they just flow off the page. You know, it's just a real gift, I would say. He's a kind of genius of the word. And I think that's because, and there came a time in his life when he just decided that music was so much a part of who he was, that he decided just to become a musician of souls and a teacher of souls, rather than, you know, even playing music at all. And so again, his relationship with silence was so profound, you know.
So, book number 7. I'm never sure how to pronounce this particular word because I hear it so many different ways. The chemical wedding. Is that
Yeah, well,
correct?
why not? I mean, I know it is the chemical wedding, but
Chemical. I've
it's
heard it so many different ways.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's Lindsay Clark's book, published in 1989, and it was the winner of the Whitbread Prize. And you say another showstopper of a story.
Well, what an extraordinary writer. I mean, he lives his novels. I happen to actually literally know him, and it was one of life's synchronicities that I had just been singing for the Byzantine composer John Tavener when was it? It was quite a couple of decades ago, actually. And I was singing the part of the Mother of God in this, I don't know how you describe it. It was called a musical icon. And I had to sing very, very low. John Tavener wanted the voice of the Mother of God to sound like it was coming out of the earth, very different from the whole idea of her being this sort of disembodied character that was sort of floating somewhere off the ground. And so she had to be faceless, she had to be of the earth, she had to be primordial. So I had to spend quite a lot of time learning this Byzantine music. And just so happened that Lindsay Clark heard it. It got recorded by Collins Classics into a double CD, and somehow or other he heard it. And at that time, I believe he was writing another of his books, which I won't name, but he basically, his message to me was that he had to completely rewrite his experience of the feminine after hearing that sound. And so hearing this composition that was coming from this opera called Mary of Egypt. So that was all about, again, a piece of music about the sacred feminine, but the feminine as an embodied force in the world. And of course, that really appeals to Lindsay Clark. So this book is about it's so beautiful. It takes place over at least 3 generations. And Sheila na gig, this kind of amazing shamanic character who's like the absolute primordial presence of the mother, the feminine. Very often she's depicted on churches and with just sitting rather like these pre-Sumerian goddesses with her legs splayed open and her vaginal opening completely open, and she's just like this raw earth goddess, no uncertain terms. And she plays a very important part in this story. And it's all about the alchemy of the relationship between man and woman. Utterly beautiful. Over 3 generations. So it's all about what they go through, these different characters, and how the relationship evolves and deepens, and it really is portrayed through the metaphor of alchemy, from lead to gold, if you like. And again, another unstoppable read. I could not put that down. It's just extraordinary. So big thank you to Lindsay for that, and much more. More.
I don't think I've ever had a guest on who's met so many of the people that they're writing about, that they've chosen. Yeah, you've met quite a few.
That's interesting. Well, it's all, I suppose it's always important to me. I feel maybe it's something to do with knowing the person that also it makes the writing so much more meaningful. I don't know.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. Yeah. There is another layer, I would think, that it gives to it. Yeah.
I must say, I would love to meet Margaret Sharat, to find out more about her experience of Hildegard, how on earth she downloaded. It was like a download or something, that novel. Yeah.
So book number 8 is Through Music to the Self, How to Appreciate and Experience Music Anew by Peter Michael Hamill, published in 1979. And you say it's travelled with you for decades.
Yeah, it will not leave me, even though I'm trying to downscale at the moment and simplify my life. It will not leave me. Why? Oh goodness, it's brilliant, and it really brings everything together in a very informed, well-informed way. And so what he's doing is exploring the whole evolution of music from a world perspective. It's eclectic. It's very clearly written. It's very accessible. And he takes you through all genres of music, and just really invites you into the whole story of world music, really, and gives you stories along the way that help you to understand really the different mythical, magical, mental, cultural connections with sound, coming from different traditions and different cultures. Absolutely.
You wrote that it addresses your number one love theme, listening. Do we know how to listen? Are we losing our skills of listening? What is auditory consciousness? Why does it matter? I mean, this is something that is, it's very clear that listening is really important to you. And, for a 4-year-old who couldn't hear, but was listening regardless, obviously, yes, it's such an important thing.
Yeah.
We need to listen to one another more. We need to listen to the world more, to the planet.
You've got it. You've absolutely nailed it, and I think more and more of us are realizing this, the fact that it's difficult for us to listen beyond the surface drama of life is concerns me very, very deeply. So listening as a practice, an embodied practice, as a practice of compassion, it's a fierce practice because it involves being able to see much deeper than the dualistic mind can see and be. And, that's really at the absolute heart of our work with the naked voice.
Yes.
Once you hear yourself, once you can hear yourself and hear your sound and take ownership of it again, it's a great moment. It's
Well, we are, taking up a lot of time, and I'm loving every single moment of it. But I do want you to talk a little bit about the naked voice. So the next two books we're going to go through a little bit quicker so that we can hear you tell us, what the naked voice is all about. So book number 9 is The Third Millennium, Living in the Post-Historic World by Ken Carey, written in the late 1970s. And of course, he had a wonderful trilogy there, Starseed Transmissions and Vision. So tell us what it was about the Third Millennium in particular.
Wow. Well, I mean, all I can say is please, everybody, read it now, because this book, again, it's a book for our time. This guy was a postman, right? And he decided he was very much a man of the earth and of nature with his wife. He had 6 children. A big life change. They went off into into nature to live self-sufficiently. Brilliant. Again, actually, I realize how important that is for us to learn that right now. And he introduces the book by expressing his gratitude to the snow-laden trees that bowed their branches and made it impossible for him to go anywhere whilst he wrote down the words. So he receives information from a divine intelligence, if you like. It could be the intelligence of nature. It just is a message for our time. And it's really saying that it's the deepest message is the message of unconditional love, and that we are at a huge turning point, which obviously we're all very aware of. And our work is not to respond to it with fear, to respond to it with love, with loving unconditional presence. And it's about so much more, of course, but that is the core theme. And I cannot recommend it enough because he's integrating worlds. He's integrating the work of humanity for this planet and on this planet, but even deeper for us to learn as human beings to listen to the voice of the planet itself, the earth itself, and to learn from there. Yeah.
So book number 10, Ananda Mai, Her Life and Wisdom by Richard Lenoy, 1996.
Well, she, Anandamayi Ma was one of the great, I don't know whether I can possibly show you a picture. You can see a little bit something, I think, here. Let me just see.
Just over to the right, to your right a little. There we go. We've got it. Yeah,
There
yeah.
it is. So this extraordinary being, Sybil Seer, one of the great saints of the 20th century India. She passed in 1982. She was my root teacher. I started dreaming about her in the 1980s. And it was really thanks to Ram Dass and various other events that happened from there that my life was irrevocably changed and transformed. And she and that experience, this encounter with her, gave birth to the Naked Voice. And Richard Lanoy, who is no longer alive, nevertheless, he was a great photojournalist, and he took that photograph of her in the 1950s. And this book, which he wrote, I think is one of the greatest books on the sacred feminine, which has absolute perennial wisdom, significance. It's like, whether you read it 10 years ago or now. And so when I saw these photographs that Ram Dass, first of all, showed me of this great, mighty saint, but she wasn't just, I don't think she wanted to be a guru. She just was born ecstatically joyous. She was just born and singing and laughing. She sang a lot, she laughed a lot. And her teachings were essentially, there is only one, and at a very young age, she would be just rolling around on the ground, and just these mantras would be pouring out of her mouth. She was an extraordinary being, ecstatic being. Her husband became her first devotee. So she lived, she really wanted to live just a regular life, but she was so extraordinary that the Hindu culture at that time clearly felt the need to protect her. So they started creating, she had this vision for sacred spaces. And so ashrams were built. But so I wanted to know, who was this person who'd taken these extraordinary photographs of this being who was just speaking to me through these images? And for many people that we work with, when you see these images of her, and again, it's that presence of the feminine that is so profound. They want to know, I wanted to know where this Richard Lanoy was. And it turned out he lived 12 miles down the road from where I lived. So,
Of course.
So that book, several of us really helped him to get that book written, and Element Books published it at that time. And you can get hold of it. I think you can get copies of it, I hope, because it's probably now out of print. But one of my final life's missions is to get it reprinted, republished. Mm-hmm. It's a remarkable piece.
Mm. Okay, so that's your 10 books. What are you reading now?
What am I reading now? Well, here's the thing. I am reading the life of Nicholas Rurik, the painter. Mm-hmm. What else am I reading? So he was this mystical painter. So that's really looking at the visual aspect of music. It's like his paintings for me are like visual music.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I have been reading and rereading this book number 9, and just loving, and just it's so revelatory, and it really speaks to me now.
Yeah, the Third Millennium.
The Third Millennium. I mean, I just it's a book to travel with, I think, at the moment. Very, very strong. And more silence, and actually I'm moving more towards the writing of music. I'm actually collaborating with a remarkable cosmologist, Jude Caravan.
I know. Jude.
Right. She's written this book called Gaia, Her Story, which will be published next year. And we're working on it together as a musical phenomenon as well. So
Oh, how wonderful.
that is a great blessing in my life at this time. She is such a privilege to be working with.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful person. So, the naked voice. You have said that our naked voice is our most untapped human resource. And Awakening Through Sound, which also happens to be the name of one of your DVD programs, can help us break through our vocal limitations, access latent insight and intuition, and bring the gift of our true self to everyone around us. So how do we do that? How do we find our naked voice?
Well, I have one. This is what you were just referring to, I think, Awakening Through Sound.
Yeah.
So I have one very simple question these days. This is like, let me see, 30 years later. And the question simply is, how do you feel? And how does that sound? You see? And so it's not just how do you feel and how does that sound? When you respond to that, so for example, I might just without thinking, that's just what happened in that moment. So if I do that again, and so that's one thing. So if I do that, I'm still a little bit in a kind of personality voice with you, and you might be listening to that, and you will have had your own sort of immediate response to how that was for you, or how it sounded, or whatever. So to go deeper in and to deepen the listening component, this unjudging, non-judging listening, all you add to that, how do you feel and how does that sound? You then add another component, which is, what quality of silence does your voice leave behind? And that's it. That's the practice. So, yeah. And then the practice, as you go deeper and deeper into that, is because for many of us, we will immediately go, oh, well, that was da 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 da, or that was da 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 da. You know, we will define it or usually criticize it in some way. So the practice is to deepen into that silence, deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, till you're just listening. And then if you do that on a regular basis, you just start to hear the deeper melodies of the soul. Yeah.
And where does our name come into it? Because you say the sound of our name is very important.
Okay. Well, let's see. So if you ask me, what is my name?
What is your name?
Chloe.
Or what is mine? Your Chloe. Okay. Do it again. What is your name?
Chloe. All right. So Chloe. So that's what just came out naturally, and that's like my programming just going, Chloe. Like, so there's a sense of, wow, what a conversation we've had. I'm just like, Chloe. All right. Now, if I actually just stay present to what I just heard, not change it, not define it, not describe it, Chloe. And then I listen to it again without changing it to what I just heard. So this is the self-remembering practice coming in now. Chloe. I'm not judging it. It's just what it was. I don't mind. It's just hi. And then it, Chloe. Chloe. And then if I slow it down a little bit, Chloe. 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 Now I can start to hear there's a pitch in there. There's a frequency. Chloe. Chloe. So if I take away the consonants and just leave the vowels, oh, now I can hear without any break, I've moved from speaking to singing. And my name itself has made that happen. My connection with my name, which is, for many of us, is the closest identity we have with our own humanity. Chloe. And then you start to hear the sound of it. So you listen more deeply and you slow it down even more. And you bring in that question. Who is singing? Chloe. You see? And if there was more time, you just go deeper and deeper and you just do it for half an hour. And life is not the same at the end of that practice as it was at the beginning. The sound starts to return from the head into the heart, that you start to really feel it, and it enters the soul. The soul. And then the soul just, thank you. The soul knows it's being heard, it's being revisioned, it's being remembered. And so this is the beginning of a deepening into who am I and who is singing. And the name, it's an interesting one, the whole who am I. A lot of people actually change their name because, of course, many of us were given these names. We had no choice in it. They were just a kind of contract with, the corporation that gave us a birth certificate, So many people actually, when they hear the sound of the soul, they go, actually, I think my name is, and then, or it may be a second name. The second name they were given is actually more connected with the soul, the sound of the soul. So then you move into a whole journey with the sound of the soul, with the musical modes, with the 7 sounds of love, with lots of energy movement, and it becomes a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's very, very rigorous, and it really helps us essentially to listen to ourselves in ways we never imagined we would.
There's so much there to be uncovered and discovered, and it's all within us, and it's all free.
It's all free. It's given. You don't need anything, just the body, the sound.
Yeah.
And of course, the biological narrative, the psychological, the emotional narrative offers fantastic gateways into the sound. So with a lot of people, we invite them to explore the entire life, the history of this lifetime as sound, non-verbal sound. So taking yourself through childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and just listening with this same witnessing presence to who was singing then, and you start realizing that every story, however traumatic, you actually realize there is no suffering that is too great for human song. And finally, because we really probably should close by now.
Yes.
I will just share with you one simple story, which is I had an intruder knocking, 4 o'clock in the morning, drunken, enraged male figure who literally, for whatever reason, chose my door to do this, to vent his rage. Long story short, the two of us ended up. So I heard his sound. So I went through a whole kind of God Almighty, and all of everything you might. Then I started the listening and I thought, this guy has got an amazing voice. And so I joined the voice. I joined his voice. As soon as I joined his voice, silence. We ended up singing together, thank you, back and forth, back and forth. And then when he was ready, he left.
Wow.
And that was not a workshop. It was not an issue with anyone that I had ever met. And there it was, right at my front door. And we just gave each other this gift. It was extraordinary. And it really demonstrated to me the homeopathic power of sound, raw sound. How if you can catch it, you hear it, you welcome it, anything is possible. Gratitude is the outcome. Yeah.
Chloe, I know you have to be somewhere else. I'm going to let you go. I wish we had more time, but I'll let you go, and I'll tell our audience where they can find out more about you. And I really would like to encourage people to listen to the radio interview you and I did. They can learn a lot more of your story. Thank you so much for sharing your 10 best spiritual books with the No BS Spiritual Book Club.
Thank you for the invitation. Great joy to commune with you.
Always joy to speak with you, Chloe. Thank you. If you want to know more about Chloe, I mean, she sings, she teaches, she performs, she records on her Naked Voice music label. She's a presenter and author for Sounds True audiobooks and the Shift Network, and her music is available from Amazon, Spotify, Apple, and from her website at chloegoodchild.com. You can also learn more about her seminal book, The Naked Voice, Transform Your Life Through the Power of Sound, which is published by North Atlantic Books, at her website and also on Amazon. And you can get that at your local Real Deal bookstore as well. And if you don't want to miss any of these live streaming episodes in this series, you can sign up to save your space to be the first to know who's coming up next, and also receive last minute reminders on the video page at the No BS spiritualbookclub.com, and there may well be a link as well, a sign up link beneath this video. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live video interview series. Till then, it's goodbye from me.